Hello everyone. Today's topic will be, it's not the child who exhausted me, but that I'm no longer myself. Introduction. A common misunderstanding. People often say the same thing to exhausted mothers. The child must be very fussy. The child won't sleep, right? It will get better when they grow up. It sounds reasonable, because everyone believes that the reason a mother collapses every day is because the child is too difficult to care for. But there are strange days. The child sleeps soundly, the house is quiet, everything is done. Yet the mother still sits there, feeling empty, so tired that she doesn't want to say another word. It's not because the child is difficult, nor is it because she's less sleep deprived than yesterday. It's a different kind of exhaustion. Exhaustion cannot be attributed to a single clear reason. There are mothers who are very good at caring for their children. Their children are well fed, well slept, and well loved. But inside them, something is slowly, silently draining away. No one sees it, no one names it, even they aren't sure what it is. They begin to wonder, why am I so tired, when everything seems fine? Why do I no longer feel like myself in this life? The most common misconception is, motherhood is exhausting because of the child. But there's a less spoken truth. Many mothers are exhausted not from caring for a child, but from living a life where they are no longer themselves. And when no one sees it, the mother often turns to blaming herself. That perhaps she is weak. That perhaps she is not good enough. That perhaps the problem is her. But sometimes, the problem was never with the child. Exhaustion doesn't come from caring for a child. Caring for a child is tiring. That's true. Tired from lack of sleep. Tired from carrying, comforting, and repeating nameless tasks all day long. But that kind of exhaustion usually has a clear form. It comes after a night of the child being fussy. It lessens when someone helps. It allows the mother to say, I'm tired today because the child is sick. There's another kind of exhaustion. Not noisy, not intense, and it doesn't disappear when the child is asleep. It's the exhaustion that comes from constantly having to be a perfect mother. A mother doesn't just care for her child. She has to constantly observe what the child needs, what the child lacks, whether the child is okay. She has to remember everything. Meal times, sleep times, vaccination schedules, feeding times, the smallest expressions on the child's face. They have to remind themselves to be patient, gentle, and not irritable, even when their hearts are overflowing. No one tells them that being constantly emotionally alert is what drains people the fastest. You can be physically tired and still feel alive. But when you constantly have to push your emotions aside, day after day, that's when you start to disappear. Many mothers aren't allowed to be tired in their own way. They're tired, but they still have to smile. They're sad, but they don't dare say it. They're frustrated, but they tell themselves, I have children, what more could I ask for? Exhaustion doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from not being able to be themselves in what they do. There are days when a mother accomplishes everything. The house is tidy, the children are well cared for, everything looks okay, but inside them is a strange emptiness. It's not exactly sadness, it's not exactly despair, it's just that they no longer feel like they belong in this life. They don't know what to call that feeling. They only know that they're tired in a way they can't explain to anyone. Because if they speak out, they fear the familiar responses. Motherhood requires sacrifice. Everyone goes through this eventually. At least you have a healthy child. Those statements aren't wrong, but they inadvertently teach mothers that their tiredness is normal, their emotions are something to be ignored. And so they learn to be silent. They continue to care for their children. They continue to fulfill their roles. But each day, they lose a little connection with themselves. Not because they don't love their children, but because they no longer have a place to put themselves in this life. Exhaustion, in that case, is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you've tried too hard for too long without being seen. And when a mother is exhausted from no longer being herself, what she needs isn't advice on how to be a better mother, but a very simple acknowledgement. You are also a human being. When a mother is no longer herself, a mother's disappearance doesn't happen in a day. There's no obvious moment to notice. No loud noise. No event serious enough to name. It happens very slowly, silently, and often disguised under the two words, being a mother. Initially, it's just a lack of time for herself. Then gradually, there's no more personal space. After that, there's no longer a need to think about herself. The mother gets used to waking up and immediately thinking about others. What does the child need? Has the child eaten? Is the child okay? And herself. Always later, there comes a time when the mother realizes she can't remember the last time she was alone without feeling guilty. They can't remember the last time they did something simply because they liked it, not because it was something they should do. They're no longer called by name. Their real names are gradually disappearing into their roles. Mother of child A, wife of Mr. B, the one who takes care of everything in the house. No one asks them what they like, nor does anyone expect their opinion beyond matters related to family. The world shrinks, revolving around the kitchen, children, and responsibilities. And in that shrinking, their inner selves also shrink. The mother still smiles, still talks, still fulfills her role, but there are very brief moments, often at night when the house is quiet, when no one needs them anymore, they sit there and suddenly don't know who they are anymore. Not in a philosophical sense, but very practically. They don't know what they like. Not sure what makes me happy. No longer connected to my own emotions. Some say, I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Some say, I feel like a shadow in my own home. The scary thing isn't the fatigue. It's the numbness. Numbness to my own emotions. Not sad enough to cry. Not happy enough to laugh. Just existing. Many mothers think this is because they are weak. Because they aren't positive enough. Because they don't appreciate the happiness they have. But the truth is, when a person constantly lives without being recognized as a person, they gradually lose their sense of self. No one can play a role 24 hours a day without being worn down. No matter how sacred that role is. Mothers don't disappear because they want to. They disappear because there's no longer room for them to exist fully. They weren't taught how to remain true to themselves when they become mothers. They were only taught how to sacrifice. They were only praised for enduring. They were only recognized for forgetting themselves. And then one day, they are exhausted. Not because the child is difficult, but because they have strayed too far from themselves. But the important thing to say is, that mother was never lost. They were just pushed back for too long, too silent, too alone, and that part of them is still there, waiting to be called again. The role of good mother and the price to pay. No one says it out loud, but most mothers learn one thing very quickly. To be recognized, they must become a good mother. A good mother always puts her child first. Always patient, always gentle, always knows what she is doing. A good mother doesn't complain, doesn't get tired for too long, doesn't doubt her role, and most importantly, a good mother must be happy to be a mother. Initially, this role seems harmless. It gives the mother a standard to cling to when things are new. But very quickly, the role begins to tighten. The mother no longer asks, "What am I feeling?" They ask, "Am I doing it right?" Every time they get angry, they blame themselves. Every time they get tired, they feel guilty. Every time they want to give up, they think, "A good mother shouldn't be like that." So they try harder. They try to be gentler than they truly are. They try to be stronger than they can handle. They try to remain silent when their hearts are overflowing. The role of good mother is not just an act. It's a moral pressure. Society doesn't need to say it directly. Just familiar phrases. Motherhood is instinct. Having children is the greatest happiness. Sacrificing for your children is natural. Those statements sound true, but when a mother doesn't feel that way, they become a very thin blade. Because if motherhood is the greatest happiness, then why are we sad? If sacrifice is natural, then why do we feel empty? Mothers don't dare ask those questions aloud. They turn the questions inward. And the answer is often, I must have a problem. The first price of this role is honesty with oneself. The mother learns to hide her true feelings, not only from others, but from herself. The second price is connection. They no longer share, for fear of being judged. They no longer ask for help, for fear of being seen as weak. They no longer say, "I'm not okay," because the role doesn't allow it. And the biggest price is themselves. When a person has to play a good version of themselves for too long, they gradually lose the ability to recognize who they truly are. The mother doesn't disappear because of her child. They disappear because they always have to be the expected image. The most painful thing is, many mothers love their children very deeply. But they think that, to prove that love, they have to give up themselves. No one tells them that you can be a good enough mother and still be an imperfect human being. You can love your children and still be tired. You can be a mother and still need care. The role of good mother isn't wrong, but when it leaves no room for vulnerability, it will wear down the person trying to live in it. And at some point, the price will be exhaustion, emptiness, and a feeling of having drifted too far from yourself. The unique loneliness of motherhood. A mother's loneliness is not what people usually imagine. It's not about being alone. It's not about lacking someone by her side. Many mothers are not physically alone. They have their children with them all day. They have family. They have a husband. They have conversations about meals, sleep, and housework. But there is a very deep kind of loneliness. Loneliness when no one truly sees you. It's the feeling of being surrounded by many people, but with no place to utter a single sentence. I'm not okay. Mothers are used to being asked about their children. How are you doing? How are you eating and sleeping? Are you well behaved? It's very rare for anyone to ask them, and you? And even when that question arises, mothers often don't know how to answer. Not because they're okay, but because they're used to not talking about themselves. There are things they dare not say. For fear of being accused of complaining. For fear of being compared, others are struggling more. For fear of being reminded, at least you still have healthy children. The loneliness grows from there. Not because there's no one to listen, but because there's no safe place to speak the truth. Mothers learn to be silent. They keep their unspoken thoughts to themselves. Nameless weariness. Moments where they don't feel as joyful as they should. They are still present in conversations, but only with a very small part of themselves. The rest, the vulnerable part, the tired part, the confused part, remains inside, unnamed. Loneliness also stems from the loss of peer empathy. Before becoming mothers, they could talk about private matters with friends. They could be listened to as individuals. After becoming mothers, many relationships change. Conversations gradually revolve around their children. Their exhaustion is seen as obvious. Complex emotions are reduced to, everyone goes through this when they become mothers. That statement isn't wrong, but it makes the mother feel like she's no longer a unique story. Just a common case. And when a person is no longer seen as an individual, they feel very lonely even when surrounded by a crowd. There are evenings, when the children are asleep, when everything is quiet, the mother sits there and realizes she has no one to call just to say, "I'm so tired today." It's not because there's no number in the contact list, but because they don't know who will truly understand. This loneliness isn't loud. It doesn't make people cry immediately. It quietly clings on every day, making the mother feel like she's living in a very narrow world. And the most painful thing is, the mother often blames herself for that feeling. They think, I have children, why do I still feel lonely? I receive so much attention, why do I still feel empty? But loneliness doesn't disappear just because circumstances should be happy. Loneliness appears when people aren't connected on the deepest level. And many mothers are living in that kind of loneliness, without words to name it. They don't need more advice. They don't need more reminders to be positive. What they need, sometimes, is just a moment to speak out. Without correction, without judgment, and without denial. The hard-to-tell truth. You miss your old self. There's a truth many mothers keep hidden in their hearts, to the point they don't even dare tell themselves. That truth is, they miss their old selves. Not a life of irresponsibility. Not selfish freedom, but who they were, before everything revolved around the role of motherhood. They miss the feeling of being able to think fully about something, without interruption. They miss making decisions based solely on their own desires, without always considering how it might affect others. They miss how they used to talk, how they used to laugh, how they used to react to the world. They miss the feeling of being a person with depth, not just someone functioning to maintain family life. This truth is hard to say, because it's so easily misunderstood. Mothers fear that, if they say, "I miss my old self," others will hear it as, "I regret being a mother." But those two things are not the same. You can love your child very much and still miss your former self. You can cherish this child and still regret a part of yourself that has disappeared. That longing is not betrayal. It's a sign of a person trying to hold on to their identity. There are times when mothers look back at old photos, not to regret their youth, but to find their own eyes in them, eyes that once had life, thoughts, personality. Now, they are still themselves, but those eyes seem veiled by weariness, responsibility, and silence. The most painful thing is not remembering the past, but it's not that she's even allowed to remember anymore. The mother tells herself, "I shouldn't think like that. I must be grateful for the present. I have my child now." These self-reassurances don't make the longing disappear. They only push the longing deeper, where it transforms into vague sadness and guilt. Many mothers don't dare admit that they remember being alone without having to keep track of time. They remember being sad without needing a valid reason. They remember being tired without having to explain. They remember feeling like the center of their own lives. And then they ask themselves, very softly, "Have I lost that person forever?" That question is terrifying, because if the answer is yes, then all current efforts suddenly become very heavy. But there's one important thing that needs to be said. Clearly, you're not remembering a dead person. You're remembering a forgotten part of yourself. The old self doesn't disappear. They're just no longer prioritized, no longer listened to, no longer called by name. And nostalgia arises, not to drag you back to the past, but to remind you that you still need to exist as a complete human being, even as a mother. Remembering yourself doesn't make you a bad mother. It just says that you are a living person, not an emotionless role. And that nostalgia, if viewed correctly, can become a very gentle starting point for a journey of rediscovering yourself, not as before, but as a new version, still with children, and still with you. The turning point. Exhaustion is a signal, not a fault. There's a moment many mothers experience, but very few call it by its proper name. It's not when they completely break down, nor does it necessarily mean things get worse. It's when they realize they can't continue living like this anymore. Not because they're weak, not because they don't love their children enough, but because their body and mind have reached the limit of silent endurance. Exhaustion is often misunderstood as personal failure. That if you're too tired, you must not have organized well. You must not have tried hard enough. You must not have been proactive enough. But exhaustion is not evidence of incompetence. It's a survival signal. Just as pain signals that the body is hurting, exhaustion signals that something in the way you're living is no longer sustainable. The mother tried for so long. Tried to understand everything. Tried to bear everything. Tried to be the best version of herself while no one asked what the price was. And when exhaustion arrived, it didn't come to punish. It came to say, "You can't keep disappearing like this." The turning point isn't when you suddenly become stronger. It's when you stop blaming yourself. Stop asking, "Why can't I endure better?" And start asking, "What in this life is draining me?" It's a very small change in perspective, but it changes everything. When you see exhaustion as a signal, you no longer see yourself as the problem. You begin to look at your circumstances, expectations, the pace of life, and the roles weighing on you every day. You realize that you've tried hard enough, and exhaustion doesn't need further proof to be acknowledged. The turning point doesn't require you to live positively, immediately. You don't need to know what you want. You don't need a big plan. You don't need to change your life overnight. Sometimes, the turning point is simply allowing yourself to pause for a moment without feeling guilty. Allowing yourself to admit, "I'm overwhelmed." Not to complain, but to be honest. From that moment, a very small door begins to open. You begin to listen to your body more, realizing that fatigue isn't just due to lack of sleep, but due to a lack of space for yourself. You begin to realize that you don't need to go back to your old self. You need to be present in your current self. This turning point doesn't lead you to a more perfect version of yourself. It brings you closer to yourself. Where you can be a mother and still be a human being who needs care. Where you can say, "I'm not okay," without having to apologize. Where you begin to understand that burnout isn't the end, but a reminder that you need a different way of living, slower, more authentic, and with you in it. And even though the path ahead is unclear, just the act of stopping to listen to this signal is a very courageous act. Not everyone dares to do that. You can start with very small things. After realizing that burnout isn't a fault, many mothers fall into another worry. So what do I do now? That question sounds reasonable, but it can also become a new pressure. As if you have to quickly become better. As if you have to find a clear path immediately. The truth is, you don't need to do anything big. When someone has been burned out for a long time, what they need first isn't to change their life, but to reduce the continued pain they inflict on themselves. Start very small, so small that no one else notices. So small that you don't need to explain it to anyone. Maybe it's allowing yourself to sit still for a few minutes without trying to do anything extra. Don't scroll through your phone. Don't think about what you haven't done yet. Just sit there and breathe. Maybe it means stopping forcing yourself to be okay in every conversation. No need to complain. Just don't deny your true feelings. I'm tired. That's all. No need for excuses. Starting small also means not demanding immediate results. You don't need to feel happier. You don't need to feel stronger. Just feel a little more relaxed. Many mothers think self-care has to be big things. Taking a break, changing environments, rediscovering passions. But when you're exhausted, those things are sometimes too far-fetched and too overwhelming. Self-care, at this moment, may be simply not scolding yourself when things aren't going well. Don't compare yourself to other mothers. Don't tell yourself, "I should have done better." Perhaps choose one small thing each day just because it makes you feel a little better. A cup of tea while it's still hot. An old song to listen to in silence. A moment standing on the balcony looking at the sky. These things don't solve everything, but they send a very important message. I still exist in this life. Starting with small things also means setting boundaries very gently. It's not about saying no to everything. It's about not forcing yourself to carry more burdens when you're already full. Perhaps postponing something that isn't really necessary today. Perhaps accepting that it's okay if the house isn't perfect. Perhaps asking for help, even if it's just a small thing. You don't need to prove that you can do everything. You just need to be safe enough not to break down again. More importantly, starting small means allowing yourself to go slowly. Going slow isn't going backward. Going slow is the only way for an exhausted person not to break down further. You don't need to become the same person you used to be. You don't need to become a better version of yourself. You just need to become a person who is present in your own life little by little. And if today, the smallest thing you can do is realize that you need to be gentler with yourself, that's enough. Really enough. Conclusion. Not the child, but the silent disappearance. Finally, looking back on it all, perhaps the most important thing to say is this. It wasn't the child who exhausted you. The child didn't come to take you away. Didn't come to make you disappear. They just need to be loved and cared for like any other child. What exhausted you so much was the fact that you had to quietly withdraw from your own life, day after day, without anyone noticing. You disappeared very slowly. In those times you put yourself down last. In those times you swallowed your emotions. In those days of playing your role while forgetting that you were also a human being. And because that disappearance happened silently, it was easily misunderstood. Others thought you were tired because of the child. You think you're weak, but that's not the truth. You're not weak. You've just been trying for too long without being seen. If there's one thing you can take away from this video, I hope it's something very small. You don't need to disappear to be a good mother. And you don't need to go back to being yourself to be worthy. Just start allowing yourself to be present again, little by little, very slowly, very gently. You're still here, and that's enough to begin with.